Welcome and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Before we get started, I want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Olivia Jack. I've been with Corporate Insight for about 7 years now, and I've spent most of that time researching the DC plan participant and plan sponsor spaces, but more recently have expanded my focus to encompass the broader workplace benefits arena. I want to encourage everyone to please submit questions using the Q&A submission form in the webinar window as we move through the presentation. And lastly, I wanted to note that all attendees will be receiving a copy of this deck via email after the session. So this slide lays out the framework for the webinar today, which will start with a brief introduction to Corporate Insight and our Workplace Finance Monitor research service. We'll then discuss our recent report on financial wellness assessments, which provides best practices and takes a look at how leading record keepers and financial wellness vendors adhere to those practices. And then we'll offer some closing thoughts and have some time for questions. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Corporate Insight, we are a market research and competitive intelligence firm that specializes in the digital customer experience offered by leading finance and insurance firms. We help our clients understand industry trends and changing consumer behaviors and provide them with actionable recommendations to maximize their competitive advantages, monitor any competitive gaps that might exist, and ultimately improve the prospect, customer, or advisor digital experience. Our recently launched Workplace Finance Monitor research service, which we detail on this slide, tracks and benchmarks the industry's top financial wellness, HSA, and stock plan providers and their digital platforms. For this research, we use a dynamic set of established leaders and emerging innovators, which are all listed on the right-hand side of this slide. Towards the end of last year, Corporate Insight fielded 2 large financial wellness surveys to help us inform our new Workplace Finance Monitor product. One of those surveys asked U.S. employees about the importance of and their participation in different workplace benefits, how often and the ways in which they engage digitally with those benefits, and their preferences around advice and education. The second survey included only employees who participate in a financial wellness program as a part of their workplace benefits suite. We asked them about the importance of the program in general and the importance of the program's individual features. We also asked about their engagement with the program itself and their engagement with those individual program features and offerings. So you can see on this slide, we have some more details about those surveys and the different survey respondent groups. Next, we'll get into our recent Workplace Finance Monitor report on financial wellness assessments, which we published in January of this year. So our report executive summaries set the stage for why the topic at hand is important. And for this report, we turn to our survey data. The graphic on the left side of this slide shows the top 10 most important financial wellness program features according to program participants. You can see a financial wellness score tied for first with a 78% top 2 box importance rating. And what we mean by that is that's the percentage of respondents who called that feature either very important or extremely important. You'll also see in that graphic that a financial wellness assessment tied for fifth with a 76% top 2 box importance rating. To the right, you'll see the top 10 most common financial wellness program activities. Reviewing a financial wellness score was the most common activity, with 37% of respondents doing so in the past 12 months, and taking a financial wellness assessment was the third most common, with 36% of respondents doing so. So here on this slide, we list the key criteria examined in the report, including the assessment inputs, results, and additional features. In terms of assessment inputs, we looked at the selection of inputs and the topic they cover, as well as the different features that firms integrate into that question response phase, like response-based peer comparisons and the ability to earn badges or points based on the answers you're providing. Our analysis of the assessment results looked at how firms rate and score participants and how firms use the assessment to provide personalized action items and/or educational content recommendations. The additional assessment features include the ability to retake or re-engage with assessments, the availability of progress tracking and ongoing feedback, as well as design features like mobile optimization and progress meters. All the firms included in the report are listed on the right side of this slide. And you can see we covered major record keepers with proprietary financial wellness offerings, as well as financial wellness program providers or vendors. Next, we'll review some best practices for financial wellness assessments and discuss how the firms that we included in the report embodied those best practices. First, firms should take a holistic approach to understanding program participants, and if possible, use assessments in tandem with actual aggregated account data and participant behavior to get more accurate and more complete pictures of participants' finances. And then the assessments themselves should also take a holistic approach and address employees' current financial circumstances, as well as their future goals, their habits, preferences, and behaviors, and their feelings about their financial situations. And that's especially important for firms that rely mainly or entirely on these assessments to understand their program participants. So first, we took a look at how firms are addressing current financial circumstances and ongoing financial habits. And we identified 13 topics that firms ask about in order to get a sense of this information. So the graph on this slide shows the percentage of firms that address each one of those 13 topics within the assessment. And as you can see, firms are generally covering a pretty broad range of these topics. At least half of assessments cover all but one topic, estate plans, and at least 75% cover 5 of the 13 identified topics. So workplace benefits and retirement planning were 2 of the 5 most commonly addressed topics. And this makes sense that these assessments would be asking about the other workplace benefits, outside of this financial wellness program that are available to that program participant. And then emergency savings, bills and debt, and general spending and savings habits rounded out that top 5 list of most commonly addressed topics. Again, comes as no surprise, as those topics are so central to understanding what someone's current financial situation is. So financial well-being also involves how a person feels about their finances and what their future goals are. So firms should ask people about these things. In order to tailor educational content recommendations, firms should also address participants' financial acumen, the topics they're interested in learning about, and their preferences for how they get advice. So similarly, we identified 6 topics that focus on these less concrete aspects of financial wellness, and the graph on this slide shows the percentage of firms that address each. As you can see, firms generally address financial goals and stressors, but are much less focused on education and advice. An impressive 85% are asking about participants' goals and priorities. 69% are asking users to indicate their overall financial stress or financial confidence levels, and 54% drill down into the specific areas that are causing participants the most stress or concern. However, less than a quarter of the firms are asking about users' financial acumen, their educational interests, or their advice preferences. Next, we'll talk about the importance of fostering a positive and encouraging assessment experience. Firms have to recognize the sensitive nature of the information they're asking for and be mindful of the phrasing and tone of the questions they ask. LifeSense and financial Finesse's assessments do a good job of this. Both come in a chat format and ask questions using personal pronouns. And these features help that assessment experience feel more personal and interactive. Financial Finesse, for example, asks users, so I know which areas to focus on, can you tell me which of the following financial wellness milestones you've achieved? And the phrasing here helps prevent that question from coming off as cold, detached, or demanding. Firms should also look for opportunities to give supportive feedback and positive reinforcement as users provide this sensitive and personal information. Both LifeSense and Financial Finesse, as well as some other firms like Merrill, reassure users who have just reported difficulties and, if possible, acknowledge any positives in what the user has just said. The LifeSense assessment, which you can see here in this slide's larger screenshot, responds to users who say they are sporadic savers with a message that first commends them for the fact that they're saving at all before providing some tips to become a habitual saver. You can also see on this slide's smaller screenshot that when users say they are only able to manage their monthly expenses sometimes, Merrill responds with a message telling participants that they are not alone and that they are going to learn some techniques that can help them with their expense management. So continuing on this topic, we'll talk about peer comparisons and how firms integrate them into the question and answer portion of assessments. So depending on the individual person and their circumstances, peer comparisons can be a source of positive feedback, or they can also serve as motivation to catch up to peers. Yet for other people, peer comparisons can be disheartening, especially when they're falling way behind their peer set. So firms should be strategic if they're looking to integrate peer comparisons during the question response phase. Empower takes an interesting approach, which you can see on this slide. The firm displays peer comparisons when users report difficulties, but just to show them that their struggles are common. So you can see here, Empower is telling a participant that just like them, half of Americans don't have $1,000 set aside for emergencies, but that they can take some steps to get there. Next, we'll take a look at some of the different ways that firms in the report communicate the assessment results. So 6 firms in the report, or 46%, provide an overall numerical score. 4 of those firms are providing scores between 1 and 10, and the other 2 use a scale of 1 to 100. 2 firms, Fidelity and Truist Momentum, provide numerical scores as well, but they score people for individual financial categories like budgeting and saving. 2 firms provide visual-based ratings in lieu of any numerical score. You can see here on this slide that Enrich uses a color-coded progress meter to communicate its results. The meter includes 5 levels spanning from needs work, red, to super strong, which is dark green. And lastly, Morgan Stanley takes a unique approach, awarding bronze, silver, or gold medals to signify financial well-being. So one recommendation that we have for firms that want to use visuals is to make sure that the visual is not too gimmicky and doesn't over-gamify the results. That can detract from the seriousness of the topic, someone's finances, that's being addressed. So regardless of the type of scores or ratings firms are using, they can take steps to help participants understand and accurately interpret the results and position and communicate the scores or ratings in a way that is motivating for the user. First, provide score methodologies. This includes explaining how scores are calculated and identifying the ways users can improve their scores. We recommend firms make at least a basic methodology available on the results screen, but also link to somewhat more detailed methodologies for users who want to learn more. You can see here Fidelity's results page makes a basic overview of the score available right within a pop-up. Users can click that "Why is this my score?" button to open that pop-up directly on the results screen. And Enriched, which is the larger screenshot on this slide, does a really nice job of outlining and clearly identifying the ways that participants can improve their scores. Next, let users track their progress over time. Showing participants that their scores have improved serves as positive feedback, while showing them that their scores have declined can motivate them to engage more with the platform. It's really important, though, that firms update the scores and ratings regularly so that a participant doesn't all of a sudden see a huge change that took place over a semi-extended period of time, which makes it really hard to pinpoint the reason or reasons for that big change. And third, alert users when their scores have changed or when they're close to leveling up. So alerts like this can help firms avoid that issue of participants logging in and seeing a big change they don't understand. And they can also motivate people to do things in that moment to reach the next level or prevent their score from changing more. Also, these alerts were really highly rated in our survey, receiving a 78% top key box importance rating. And fourth and finally is contextualized scores. Some of the best practices that we just discussed on the previous slide can help firms accomplishments, but there's also a few other ways that we've seen firms do this. First, they provide category level scores or supplement overall scores or ratings with a list of areas where participants are performing well and a list of areas where they can improve. This allows firms to provide positive and negative feedback in tandem, which should be a real focus of communicating results. So alternatively, if a firm just provides one overall numerical score, it can end up just being one big bad piece of news. Next, firms can integrate colors. So while using the standard red to green scale has the benefit of making it immediately clear how well someone's doing, being in the red can be emotionally triggering, especially since the person has just shared all this sensitive financial information, which might include information about their debts. You can see here on this slide how Financial Fitness Group curtails potential negative impacts for participants with low scores. At the bottom of the screenshot, you'll see in bold, the score explanation starts with "there is good news." And then the firm goes on to say that improving your financial fitness does not have to be difficult, that small changes can have a big impact, and that the participant can control their financial futures. And again, firms can integrate peer comparisons. So we discussed how firms use peer comparisons in the question and answer portion of assessments, and providing these comparisons within the results comes with the same pros and cons. But firms can display the comparisons in a way that just makes them one part of the results. For example, you can see on this slide, Financial Finesse displays the national and peer averages in that light gray font just to the side of the big blue score and the big speedometer graphic. So the information is available, but it's not central. So we should also note that there's a lot of overlap in how these different techniques come together to encourage engagement. For example, clearly identifying the ways a person can improve their score tells them first, this initial score is not the end-all be-all, and second, it's within your power to improve it. And then providing progress tracking would reward people who did take action and kind of solidifies that action-reward feedback loop. Our next best practice is to provide ways to re-engage with assessments. Taking a financial wellness assessment is a great way for users to begin a financial wellness program, but it's also important that participants can re-engage with assessments and update their information as their financial circumstances change. This also helps users measure the progress that they've made since they started using the program. Firms should let users retake assessments in full, but ideally they should also make it quick and easy for people to update specific information. So there's three ways that firms can facilitate re-engagement. First, pre-filling the inputs with previous responses. This is especially important for when users are retaking the assessment in full, and something that 45% of the firms in our report do. Next, breaking down the assessment inputs into sections and letting users jump to the section they want to update. On this slide, you can see how Best Money Moves does this. You can see they list the different topics with edit links just to update that portion. Lastly, periodically reminding users to update or retake assessments via email, and also posting messages within the platform itself. BrightTime is one firm that prompts employees to retake its assessment about every 6 months. Firms can also look for ways to integrate follow-up questions or additional questions outside of the assessment flow. That's something that 5 firms in our report do. LifeSense is one of those firms. They offer a check-in feature, which is shown at the bottom of this slide, that asks follow-up questions based on the employee's answers to the initial assessment. So if a user indicates that they don't have a budget, the check-in feature may ask them to provide some more insights into why. If they say that they are contributing to their company retirement plan in the assessment, the feature may then ask them for more details about their contributions, their company match policy, and their anticipated retirement income needs. And finally, score-related alerts or notifications, which we had just discussed previously, are also a great re-engagement technique. Now we'll turn to how firms can leverage results to enhance the financial wellness program experience. And first, we'll talk a little bit about the actionable advice part of that. 76% of our survey respondents said actionable recommendations for improving their financial well-being or their financial wellness scores is very important or extremely important. And about 69% of firms' results include action items. However, some firms' action items are pretty general. For example, they may suggest saving more for retirement. Standout firms offer more specific and more actionable advice, like contributing a specific amount to an emergency fund, and then, and this is very important as well, providing links to the participant site page or the external workplace benefit site where the user can enact that recommendation. It's also important that action items be attainable and appropriate. For example, a participant who is off track for their retirement should not see a recommendation that they contribute 60% of their next paycheck to their 401k, even if that's what would be needed to get them on track. First of all, if they're that far off in their retirement, they probably can't afford to contribute that much. Plus, the amount is going to probably exceed plan and/or IRS contribution limits. So now let's take a look at some firms that do these best practices well. First, financial finesse. You can see the firm's action plan on this slide, which includes a take advantage of your company benefits section, where users can find links to their external workplace benefits sites where they can take those actions related to the recommendation or that step in the action plan. Also, Merrill. For example, Merrill's assessment results can include a consider contributing more to your retirement action item. And that action item includes the savings goal, how close the participant is to meeting that target rate, and it also includes links to the participant site retirement planning calculator, as well as the salary deferral management interface. Turning to the educational content recommendation part of this best practice. These recommendations should have a clear connection to the assessment results and to user-reported areas of interest or concern. The recommended content should also come in a variety of different formats. So looking back to our discussion about assessment inputs, it's important that the assessments ask for participants' educational preferences so that the firms can optimize these content recommendations. And I'd also want to expand a bit on our recommendation regarding different content formats. First, people like to learn in different ways. Some people prefer text-based content, and others are audio-visual learners. And our survey found some demographic trends related to content preferences. Younger generations consistently rate video and audio media higher than older generations, including summary level videos and podcasts. And our survey respondents who identified as male also rate audiovisual media, especially podcasts and longer videos, higher than our survey respondents who identified as female. Another reason is that different content mediums inherently vary in terms of complexity and detail. So the medium that's best suited for a participant can also depend on their knowledge levels and what they're trying to accomplish. So for example, someone who is already fairly knowledgeable about investing might benefit from a series of articles that focus on specific advanced investing concepts, while another person who's looking to build a foundational knowledge of investing might benefit most from an interactive course that takes them slowly through some of the core tenets of investing. While an impressive 92% of the firms in our report do use the assessment to offer educational resource recommendations, as we said before, less than a quarter are asking participants about the topics they want to learn about and the type of resources they prefer to use. So you can imagine firms are adhering to these best practices for resource recommendations to varying degrees. So this brings us to our final best practice slide, where we look at some unique assessment features firms can provide to stand out in the increasingly competitive financial wellness landscape. Firms should look at features that aid accessibility. This is a key consideration that's becoming more and more of a focus among record keepers, among workplace benefit providers, and financial firms more broadly. For example, My Secure Advantage allows users to select answers with their keyboards rather than with their mouse. And this is a nice option for anyone to have, but it's especially beneficial for those with restricted motor movements. You can see in the top screenshot of this slide, when a user hovers over the answer options, a small pop-up lets them know which key corresponds with that answer. And the keys are consistent, throughout the assessment. And some other unique features can help users stay engaged with the assessments. For example, LifeSense Chat includes a sidebar section with a link or 2 links to educational resources that are related to the current question that the user is answering. Users can save the resource for later, but they can't access it directly from the chat interface. And the firm does this to prevent users from navigating away while they're taking the assessment. Financial Finesse stands out for dynamically updating the wellness score and awarding points as users move through the assessment. And that can make users want to keep answering questions so that they can see their score increase and earn more points. So that wraps up the presentation portion of the webinar. These next 2 slides in the deck summarize all the best practices that we've discussed and the way that firms embody these best practices. And we hope these slides will be a helpful resource for anyone looking to revisit the deck, which again, I want to say you all will receive via email after this presentation. But seeing as we just discussed all this information in depth, we'll take the remaining time to answer some questions from the audience. So please just give us a brief moment to review those submissions, and we will start up again in just a minute. Okay, thanks everybody for holding there. So it looks like we did get a couple of questions. And please feel free to submit any more questions as we are answering these first couple. So first, do most firms take a one-size-fits-all approach to the assessments, or how do they make sure that the questions are relevant for the person who's taking it? Okay, great. That's a great question, and certainly something we see firms take different approaches to. We definitely have firms that we covered in the report that rely on largely the same set of questions. For those firms, the questions generally tend to be broad enough to apply to a wide range of different users and really focus on more of the fundamental, financial habits, underlying emotions, key financial information that are applicable regardless of the person, their background, or their situation. And then there tends to be a little bit of less follow-up. So, avoiding asking someone who just said they don't contribute to a retirement plan how much they contribute. Having a broader set of questions. And then for those firms, the more personalized aspect of the program comes into play post-assessment. So often, the firms will personalize based on using tailored educational content recommendations, but also will use that information to help their financial coaches develop a better understanding of individual needs. So, the one-size-fits-all technique works when using kind of these broader questions, and especially, for firms that are relying a lot on individualized financial coaching and using that information really to give the financial coaches a foundation for conversation. But there are definitely firms who are developing more interactive or logic-based questionnaire styles. So one firm that's kind of moved away from that one-size-fits-size model would be Financial Finesse, and they use kind of a dynamic question flow, which means the user's answers to a previous question determine which questions they'll see next. And that increases the chances that the user is just going to be presented with questions that are actually relevant to their interests and needs. A next question we got, how long should these assessments be? I can see pros for having shorter ones to make sure people often complete them, but also longer ones that get more accurate results. Again, this is a really great question and something that we know firms, grapple with striking that balance between, making it user-friendly, making it something that people can fill out, that they finish, and then, getting all of those more nitty-gritty insights. So how long the assessment should be depends on whether the firm is using the assessment as the main source of information about the participant, or if they're supplementing the information from the assessment with actual data, with information from, financial coaching, or, information about what participants are doing with their other workplace benefits. So, firms that are relying mainly or entirely on assessments would likely need more questions than ones that are, pulling from multiple sources of information. There's also ways that firms can, strike this balance by kind of breaking up the assessment. So to avoid an overly long assessment and avoid those drop-off rates, firms can kind of have a core component of the assessment where, the first piece asks those most important and critical questions, and then, organizing additional inputs that address, financial topics, individual specific financial topics in more detail, offering those additional assessments across, a couple sections that the participant can complete over time across multiple browsing sessions. And then another way to kind of, balance those issues would be, what we spoke about, LifeSense follow-up, their check-in feature. So, integrating those follow-up questions or those additional questions outside of the assessment flow gives people an opportunity to answer one or two questions at a time without having to re-engage with the full assessment. So there's definitely a couple of techniques that firms can use to make sure that they're getting their core questions answered, but also providing the opportunity for users who are highly engaged, who want to provide more information, giving them clear avenues to do so. A third question we have here, of the firms you reviewed, did everyone offer a unique assessment? Did you see any firms leveraging existing scales? Another great question. So actually, we did see several firms like BrightDime, I believe, and LifeSense using questions taken from what is called the CFPB scale in the assessments, and that is something we did call out in our report. Both of those firms were taking questions directly from that scale, but we also saw other firms, clearly taking inspiration from that scale, rephrasing or building off kind of that standardized list with, situational, behavioral, or emotional questions. So, taking that question and then, flipping it on its head a bit, have you done X, Y, and Z? How do you feel about X, Y, and Z? Trying to kind of get, that more self-reported hard data and that, sentiment-based data. So yes, the that was the one scale that we saw overlapping across the assessments. That was the CFPB financial well-being scale. Sorry, just one moment, just checking for some additional questions. Can you speak to any best demonstrated activities that encourage employees to start using the assessment? How to overcome any inertia? So a lot of firms use the assessment as the kickoff to the program. It's really presented like Enrich as the first step to engaging with the program. Firms can make it kind of a requirement, but they can also present it within as a component of the registration and onboarding process, but also let the user know that they can skip the step for now and come back later. We also know that certain providers will work with employers to run contests or incentive programs. So, like being entered for a drawing or earning points towards a broader project. So, that's something that companies can do as well, trying to work with a financial wellness vendor to create kind of an ongoing competition and completing the assessment as well as other parts of taking other actions within the program, part of that competition. And with that, I think that is all of the questions that we received from the audience today. Again, I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to join us. We'll be wrapping up a few minutes early, give you back about 15 minutes in your day. Again, thank you so much for joining, and thank you very much for all of the insightful questions. With that, I'll just note again, you will be receiving a copy of this deck by email. Please feel free to reach out to us with any follow-up questions or any comments or insights you may have. You'll find our contact information here on this screen. So again, thank you everyone so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.